that we've had in Blacksburg in a while.
Sure. And the forecast series is going to keep going for.
Is it?
Yeah.
Good.
Until like Friday.
Good. I was hoping like to see some longevity out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't want
Forecast right now. Let's say it's just going to keep going for the rest of the week.
Wow.
I mean, we're not going to
Thanks for
see the
ruining
supermoon tonight.
our. Yeah, it's nice. The supermoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
I heard it's dangerous wearing a cape in this kind of weather, so probably not gonna be all that super. Michael doesn't wear a cape in this weather. Do you, Michael? So, Allison, let's just talk.
Can we delete that part from the video?
No one knew what Michael Sutton I was talking about. So I think it's this evening at sundown.
Sukkot.
Yeah, it's sundown this evening. So this evening at sundown begins the festival of Sukkot. So we've done Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and now the third major festival of the fall is Sukkot. Anybody know anything about the festival of Sukkot? Probably about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe actually probably learned that 7 or 8 years ago, the church I was pastoring in Toledo, we actually camped out for one of the nights of Sukkot. The first night of Sukkot, we all put up tents and slept outside, put a bonfire. And Malcolm went with me, and he was like 3 or 4 at the time, so I'm guessing it was about 7 or 8 years ago. And we're in the tent, and I'm getting him tucked in, and I want to go back out to the bonfire and hang out with everyone. I'm getting him tucked in. What do you need, Tom?
The link.
You need the link? He emailed it this morning.
Oh, I didn't get it. I usually do it.
Is someone asking for it?
Yeah.
That's okay. I'm telling a story anyhow about Malcolm that's somewhat tangentially related to Sukkot. So anyhow, did you not do it right? Because there's no color on you.
Shower.
All right. So anyhow, we're camping out for Sukkot. We're in the tent. Malcolm's getting ready to go to sleep. I want to go back out to the campfire. And I was like, what do you think about all this, buddy? He's like, this has been awesome. He's like, but what's so special about Sue's coat? His godmother's name is Sue. And she was there, and he couldn't understand why we were having like this big bonfire and party for Sue's coat. But that is not what Sukkot means. Did you get it taken care of, Tom?
No, that's it. It went to me. I didn't get it.
Okay. So, anybody have any ideas what Sukkot is about?
Harvest.
Yep, harvest. Okay. So it's the end of the dry season. And at the end of the dry season is the celebration of Sukkot. And people, there was a prayer or a chant that they would do. Anybody know what that is? It was, "O Lord, send us rain to save us." Right? And so there was this prayer of God to send rain. So it was ushering in the rainy season. Anybody know within Christianity what is significant about Sukkot?
In Christianity?
Yes.
I'll with Jesus.
Yes. Very good.
He was born supposedly on Sukkot.
The argument is that today, Merry Christmas. You guys had no idea. It's Christmas. That this is probably more likely than, in fact, we know it definitely wasn't December 25th. But this is probably the most likely date or time of year that Jesus would have been born. It makes a lot of sense. One of the major cues that we get is in John chapter 1. It says, "And the Word became flesh and Sukkoted amongst us," or tabernacled amongst us. It is the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, Feast of Sukkot. And so the indication or the idea is that Jesus would have been most likely been born during Sukkot. John kind of picks up on it. Every other major moments throughout Jesus' life are all around festival moments, right? Even his family going up to Jerusalem when they lose him, they went to Jerusalem to celebrate a festival. His death is at Passover. The resurrection would have been at the Feast of First Fruits. Then you have the Pentecost scene, right, with the movement of the Spirit powerfully throughout the temple. And so it makes good sense that Jesus was probably born during one of the festivals as well. And so here's the picture. So anybody know the story of Jacob and Esau? What is it? Someone tell me the story of Jacob and Esau. It can be brief, it can be right, it can be wrong. We'll just correct it if it's wrong. But go ahead and take a shot. Anybody?
Is that the one where they were both trying to gain the favor of their father?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else?
Esau was the firstborn, so he had the birthright.
Okay.
And Jacob's mother directed him to trick Isaac.
Okay.
Into believing that he was Esau and gave his blessing to Jacob instead.
Does anybody remember the prayer or the word from God to the family about what was the promise? That the older would serve the younger, right? So who are the descendants of Esau? What are they called? What? No. The Essenes are just is like a Pharisee or something, or Sadducee would be the Essenes.
I figured it was wrong.
Jews? Nope. That's a good guess. The Edomites. Okay. So the Edomites are a descendant of Esau. Jacob becomes renamed as what? Israel. Okay. So we have Israel and we have the Edomites. And the promise was from God that the older brother, Esau, would worship or would be subservient to Jacob. Okay. So now let's flash forward quite a distance from Genesis to the picture in Matthew. Okay. And who is the ruler of Israel at the time of Jesus' birth? We should do this like trivia night at yeah. Who was the ruler of Israel when Jesus was born?
Was it Nero?
What's that?
Nero?
No.
But Herod was wrong.
Herod.
So was he considered the ruler?
Well, he was the tetrarch or the king of Israel. It was like a weirdly held position because Rome actually ruled, but there was a figurehead, if you will, who is Herod. And Herod became known and is still known for his amazing architectural feats. Like if you look at Herod's temple, you look at the temple in first century, you look at Herod's buildings, and you look at the port cities that Herod built, they're amazing. And they're everything that is spectacular and big about first century Roman culture, all of that. I mean, just these amazing pieces of work. Then, in a small village, born poor, why do we know that Jesus was born poor? Anybody know? There's a clue in the Bible that declares that he was poor. Is when he was taken to be circumcised, the offering that they gave was a poor person's offering when he was taken to be circumcised. So you couldn't picture a more different scenario. You have Herod, who is king and ruler over Israel. He has built all these magnificent things, amazingly rich. We also know very violent and horrible as a human being, but he was the upper echelon of power and magnificence. And then in this lowly, impoverished setting, you have Jesus is born. In fact, Jesus would have been a mamzer. What's that? A bastard, right? Because Jesus' father, Joseph, at least according to our tradition and storytelling and imagination, is not his physical father, right? And so Jesus not only was poor from a small town, but he was also a mamzer, which was not good. Jesus is a descendant of who? Give you a hint. We talked about two names. Jacob. Herod is a descendant of who? Esau. He is an Edomite. So, here is Herod, the Edomite, who is ruler over Israel and born in a manger, a food trough for animals, is Jesus. And in this scenario, we believe that Jesus is going to become that promise, that Herod would bow down. So imagine this scene. I mean, this scene is spectacular. Like, we couldn't have it set up more of, I don't know, let's use a cliche, the David and Goliath moment, right? Of like Jesus versus Herod. And so in this picture, this is the story as it's set out. Jesus, a descendant of Jacob, is born, and we could never imagine a scenario in which Esau's descendant, Herod, would ever bow and serve Jesus. Yet, here we are, however many thousand years later, right? Where Herod is known more about killing his own sons to protect his throne, and you have Jesus, who is known to basically have transformed the world. Some of his followers for good, some of them for bad. So, this is kind of the picture that we have of Jesus' birth narrative, and we see and we hear that he is tabernacling amongst us. So, at the celebration of Sukkot, there would be placed in the one of the courts of the temple 4 things. Anybody know what they are? I would win in this trivia game. These 4 things were menorahs. Anybody know what a menorah is? I see heads nodding. So what are menorahs? Someone get it right. Here we go. What's a menorah? Candles. But what specifically? Yeah, that's good. That's right. Yeah. So they're candles, and they would have been in the Holy of Holies. Why did the menorah become a symbol to Judaism? In fact, we have a whole holiday around that now. Yes, but why specifically the menorah?
Oh, the oil lasted 8 days.
Correct. So the menorah was supposed to be refreshed and lit daily and kept lit. When Israel got the temple back from control of Antiochus, right? We're talking about back in Maccabean time. When they regained control from Antiochus, they discovered that there was only enough oil to keep the menorah lit for 1 day. And so they had this debate. Do we light the menorah knowing that we're going to run out? And it was going to take them 8 days to make new oil that was considered to be holy, to be put in, to be used for this. Do we light it now, or do we wait so that way it never goes out again? Right? So do we wait until the 7th day, knowing that the following on the 8th day we'll have more oil and we can light it? And the story goes that Israel couldn't wait because it was kind of our equivalent today would kind of be like a porch light. I realized that if anyone hearing this is a rabbi or something hearing this might be like, whoa, that's a little reductionist. But to make it simple for us to think about it, it's like kind of have a porch light. And so the menorah being lit was showing that God was home, right? And so Israel rescuing back, and I'm kind of ruining our Hanukkah conversation, but oh well, we'll go with it. But then you'll get all the answers right when I ask the quiz then, right? So rescuing back, they decided we can't wait any longer to see the picture that God is home, right? They didn't imagine that God was displaced and wasn't around. That's not how they thought, just like we don't. But that picture of seeing the menorah lit was very powerful to them. And so the story goes that they couldn't wait. And they're like, even if it only stays lit for a day and we have to wait 7 more, we'll do it. And the story goes, God miraculously, or the oil miraculously, lasted the whole 8 days. And some rabbis suggest because God also couldn't wait to say that he was home. So it's this beautiful picture to me. And so in the temple courts, in one of the courts, they would set up 4 of these. Now, typically the menorah that's in the Holy of Holies is basically not simple, it's very ornate, but an expected size. It's not something that's huge or anything like that. It would be like a lampstand or something. But for Sukkot, when they celebrate, they set up 4 of these. And they were 75 feet tall, right? And they had these huge flames on them, right? So if you can imagine that. And the Temple Mount, why is it called a Temple Mount? Because there's a temple built on top of a mountain, right? Which means it's high, right? And if you ever lights something on fire and then covers it, who sets it up on a hill, right? And so here on the top of this hill is a light. And what would you say that became known as? I think John 1. It's the light of the world. And so here in John 1, where we see the picture of the Word became flesh and tabernacled amongst us, and he is the light of the world, right? So for Sukkot, Israel for those 8 days is the light of the world. And these menorahs are lit and they sit up on top of this. Now, something else that happens with Sukkot is that at Sukkot, I told you, it's the end of the dry season, and it's prayer for God to save them through rain. Who knows what living water is? And don't say Jesus. Sunday school's over. That was true, but yeah. Who knows what living water is? Like, actually, what is living water? What is it? We still have living water. It's not religious. What is living water? What? Yeah. So a stream, a river, rain would even be considered living water. What is the opposite of living water? Dead water. So what is the opposite of living water? If living water is moving water, what would stagnant water, a puddle? What would be? What could you imagine in a more arid area such as Israel? Would you imagine that they would have had that would have been a good representation of non-living water? That's a little bit of a complicated question. I apologize. The way I worded it. Cisterns, right? You would build a cistern, and the water would collect in it and not move. It would just sit in there, right? And so the picture is comparing living water to a cistern. We hear Jesus do this in the Gospels, right? And living water, who makes living water? God. Okay, let's not get into creationist debate. We have the Triceratops rider in our midst. And so we have living water, which is in some way, it is not made by the hands of man. Let's go with that, right? And then you have a cistern, which is made by the hands of man. And Jesus often offers us something, which is better, living water or a cistern. You are like a cistern, broken, not even able to hold water, is how he offers us. And so oftentimes the picture is we work so hard to duplicate the things that God just naturally wants to do in us or through us, right? Jesus says in John he says, come to me, what? Thirsty. There's also the weary and heavy laden. But if you come to me, I am living water. And then what does he promise? Anybody remember? Let's look at John 7.
You will have life.
That's a good guess. All right, so John 7:37. On the last day of the feast, anyone want to take a guess what feast this is? Come on, what feast do you think it is? Go for it. Actually, it's not here, so you can say it. It's Sukkot. It's the feast of Sukkot. It's the Feast of Tabernacles, right? When the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." So, what happens when you put aside your cistern making and instead engage in living water? What happens? You become living water. That a well rises up within you, and you become the living water. So think about this. When you want to be refreshed, now don't get me wrong here, these are swimming pools. We move the water, otherwise it would be horrible, right? That's what the filtration system is, keeps the water moving. You all understand. Have you ever seen a swimming pool where the filtration system stops? Okay? So when I say living water versus a pool, I'm not speaking about the swimming pool. Let's think about the swimming pool where the filtration system has stopped working. What sounds like a better way to spend your afternoon when you're stressed, it's been a long week at work, and you decide that you want to go and enjoy some water? Are you going out to the living water, or are you going to go out to the stagnated pool? Right? So the living water is this refreshing, life-giving, right? Where do trees grow? Where do the things grow that are, where do you see life? Why do you think that when we filled the U.S. With all of our sins and everything attached to that, but when we filled the U.S., why do you think our major cities ended up in port towns? Like some of our only few cities that aren't are because they're centered on railroads, right? Which is the Iron River in a lot of ways. And so here's this picture of that we even sit at the beds of rivers and moving and living water because that's where life is, that's where things grow. And Jesus seems to think that when we engage him, when we experience the living water that comes through faith and faithfulness, that we not only get to enjoy being next to the water, but we become that living water for others. Think about that. That's beautiful. That's unbelievable to think about, the idea that when I am in need of refreshing, that I experience that refreshing through you guys. That through other people who are the living water, that I can experience that life-givingness, that beauty and stuff through you guys. And that's the promise that Jesus gives. So let's look at the scene with Jesus. So let's look at verse 10. Okay, 7:10. But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private. So this is the feast of Sukkot. The Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, "Where is he?" And there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said he is a good man, others said, "No, he is leading the people astray." Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him. So about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. So Jesus is in the temple teaching during the festival of Sukkot. So one of the things that happened during the festival of Sukkot, is my son good? Do you need something, Malcolm?
This is what
Okay. So during the Feast of Sukkot, one of the priests would walk from where everyone was gathered to worship, and they would walk down to the pool of Siloam. And they would take with them a pitcher. And the pool of Siloam was what? Living water. Right? And so they would take this water, and to the chants and the cheers of the people, "Oh, save us with your living water, O God, send your rain." He goes back up and he pours it over the altar. This is what's happening at this festival, right? And this is where, in verse 37, when the last day of the feast, this is when this happens. The great day, that's why it's called the great day. Jesus stood up. So think about this. It would get completely silent as the priest poured the water over the altar. Israel has just prayed for God to save them by sending his living water. And it's complete silence as the priest is pouring water over the altar. And someone stands up in the middle of the temple and shouts. Right? That's what the text says. Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him would receive, for as yet the Spirit had not been given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. In this moment, Jesus stands up in the middle of the temple during the pouring out of the living water, and John has us remember this scene as Jesus stands up and says, "I am the living water. If you are thirsty, you don't go to the pool of Siloam. If you are thirsty, you don't go to a cistern. If you are thirsty, you come to me." So this is this picture of Sukkot that I think is so exciting to me when I think about my faith, when I think about who Jesus is that he was born at the Feast of Tabernacles, that he was this movement from arid and dry season to living water and rain and life. He is the opponent to the Edomite Herod that seems to be in power, yet Jesus is ultimately the one that ends up being in power. And all of this is the picture that we have for us that gets celebrated during these next 8 days. Now, certainly within the Jewish community to this day, they don't see Jesus in these Sukkot pictures. That's what creates some beauty to us, though, because I would argue for most of us, we've never heard John 1 or John 7 through the lens of Sukkot. And so we've missed out on this beauty of this festival, this celebration. So any questions or thoughts? Anyone on there have any questions or thoughts?
Not yet.
All right. What are your questions or thoughts? Pushback, ideas, whatever.
I have a somewhat related question.
Yeah.
So the temple where this is happening, this is the second temple?
Yes.
And this is the same one that the Hanukkah thing happened at? That was first time. I don't know my temple history at all.
The temple, it would have been the same temple as the Maccabees, at least I'm almost positive it is. Though Herod did a lot of additions and stuff, but I believe that this would have been the same.
And it's like nearby Jerusalem?
It's in Jerusalem. Yes. Yeah. The first temple was destroyed, Babylonian exile. Nehemiah rebuilt it. And so
in the same place?
yes. They just took the ruins and cleared them and then rebuilt it. And, my history isn't very good about that. I'm not 100% sure what the history of the actual temple structure is through that time. I should probably know that. Is there a reason that you guys
Oh, I just
curious?
we keep saying temple and I don't know anything about physical.
So it's why first century would be Second Temple Judaism. That's where that phrase Second Temple Judaism comes from. Is because by the time the Second Temple Judaism had evolved and everything, so it looked different than what it had looked even during the first temple or even the tabernacle. Any other questions or thoughts?
Maybe so these 75 menorahs,
Yeah.
they like always there, but they only light them for Sukkot.
Yeah, I would imagine that they're taken away and brought out. If you think about Rome and Roman culture and stuff, it's not all that shocking. Like
Yeah.
they did amazingly huge shows and stuff that, I mean, figuratively, but possibly literally move mountains. I mean, they built stairwells over mountains. I can't imagine they stood out because the language that I've seen read is that they were set up in the women's court of the temple, and so that's the best I can do. So setup sounds like they weren't permanent fixtures, and I don't think it would make sense for them to be permanent fixtures anyhow, just because they have a menorah already in the Holy of Holies.
It's not a very theological question, but
It doesn't have to be.
is this where the idea, like the puritanical idea of a city upon a hill, comes from?
Well, yeah, I think part of it, but I mean, at that time, every major city was built either on a hill or in a a great defensible area.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if that kind of is what solidified it as part of the imagination.
So, how do we end up celebrating Jesus' birthday and Christmas?
I would argue it's because as Christianity became more and more Gentile driven, that the influences of people's experiences and family traditions became intertwined. I want to be very careful because we can do some weird things and be like, it's paganism creeping into Christianity. Well, we're talking about 2,000 years ago. We should get over some of that. Right? But what I would argue is just like you and I, we all have traditions around maybe not Christmas, but around other holidays or other moments that you celebrate. Whether it be every year you and some friends at the same time always go camping on the same weekend every year because somehow it became a tradition. Within Gentile culture and pagan religions, not in kind of a negative statement, but within pagan religious expression, there is a relatively common winter solstice type celebration. And since most of the culture by that time of Christianity had become Gentile, I think in a lot of ways it was just, well, what are we celebrating if it's no longer the winter solstice? What would we be celebrating? So one of the ways we can also point to and say Christmas is even just a strange concept is if you think about it, births are not celebrated in Judaism or the Bible. Like there's no birthday parties, right? Like birthday celebration is something that's very Gentile, not Jewish. If you think about it, we have all these festivals, but there's no birth of David Day or birth of Abraham Day or birth of Moses Day. You would think that there would be.
Kelly asked, is there any connection between the living water picture of Sukkot, in parentheses, I don't know how to spell that, and the idea of water symbolizing rebirth? The picture between the living water picture of Sukkot and the idea of water symbolizing rebirth.
Well, I think again, it's just life. It's more so life than it is about rebirth. So like water, like a baptism, if that's what she's kind of pointing to, is you're reborn. But the reborn part isn't that the water rebirths you; it's that the water represents the birth canal that you're being born out of again. And so this idea of life fits both stories, both pictures. That this is what gives you life. This is what cleanses you. So like sin is considered corruption or death, right? And so you would go into a mikvah, which was moving or living water, and you would go into a mikvah, and it would cleanse you and restore life. So my argument would be that it's not about rebirth; it's about life, and you can only be reborn if you're doing something that brings forward life. So yes, I think that there is a connection there. I just don't know that it's not the water that does the rebirthing. It's the actual what's the word I want to use? Ritual that demonstrates a rebirth. So, that worked for her?
Yep.
Good.
For the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvahs, are they celebrated around someone's birth date, or is it another time?
Yeah, so again, just like everything else, Judaism has evolved, and so if you went into a synagogue, you could probably see a birthday party being celebrated there. Again, this is where we can make an argument that pagan tradition or Gentile tradition isn't all bad, it's just not what was originally part of the religious traditions. So bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah is often used, so bar mitzvah is for a boy, bat mitzvah is for a girl. It's usually around the age of puberty, so around 12, 13, 11, somewhere around there. And typically, it's dependent on every child, though I would argue that if you were in a synagogue with lots of kids, they all probably had their bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs around the same time, just because, that's kind of how we do things. And so the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah tends to be, and again, I'm speaking a little bit outside of my right to be speaking about it, but is more so around the child becoming an age where they can make adult-esque decisions. Right? One of the beauties, this is kind of an aside, but you brought it up, so we'll go with it, that I think is very different from Christianity versus Judaism is much of Christianity will argue that a child who's 10, their sins just kind of like dissipate into thin air, right? So anything that they do that's wrong, there's this age of accountability. Have you guys heard that term? So within a lot of Christian tradition, they'll say, well, there's an age of accountability. So a young child before a certain age isn't guilty of sin, right? That's how people that believe in an eternal, conscious, tormenting damnation can feel okay about a 7-year-old who might pass away. And they go, well, did they know Jesus? It doesn't matter because they're before the age of accountability. That all becomes weird and icky to me. But the difference between Christianity and Judaism in this is that Christianity just kind of makes whatever the child does before a certain age just kind of dissipate. Like, well, they're just not accountable for it. In Judaism, it's the parents take on the guilt. So sin still happens. It's just, so Malcolm, for instance, when he does something that causes harm or hurts something or someone in some way, that's on me. I'm responsible for that, right? Which I think is a really beautiful picture, in my opinion, because that means that my parenting matters and that the way I engage my child matters, that the way that he lives reflects me, both in accountability and other things. So I personally find that picture to be great. Then again, I have an absolutely wonderful child. If I had a little demon-possessed kid, I'd probably be like, nope, age of accountability for us. Not my problem. So, all right, any other questions or thoughts? So when you're thinking about Jesus and you're looking at the Gospels and think about the fact if he was indeed born in Sukkot, which I'm pretty convinced of it, but I understand if you're not, that's fine. But if you think about all of his language throughout the Gospels is always about the harvest is ready, right? He's always talking about harvesting. He's always talking about workers in the field. He's always talking and using language around the land and gardening and all of that. And to me, that fits so beautifully with this picture of him being born in Sukkot. That he's ushering in the harvest. Is this picture that I love. So, So I guess if I wanted, let me think about what question I want to leave you guys with. Sometimes we spend so much of our life doing a ton of work and putting in a ton of effort to make a cistern. Because we get in this mindset that God helps those who help themselves. It's a non-biblical quote of the Bible that people like to use. That is not in there, by the way. And so we get in this mindset and we start building these cisterns, and we work really, really hard to collect this water, and it becomes stagnant. In ancient times, and even today, probably in cisterns. If you were to open a cistern and go into it, right? First of all, it'd be below ground level, most likely you walk down to it, and there's a good chance that there are dead animals in there because they went down there to get something to drink, fell in, drowned. It is diseased. It is unhealthy, right? And imagine that versus sometimes we just need to kind of depend on the goodness of God in certain situations. So we work in order to build our own. You guys have heard it before. You work so hard to build your own kingdom, right? And I hesitate to even talk about that piece because it can come across like you shouldn't work hard, because that's not at all what I'm talking about. Because guess what? To get to living water, you still have to walk there. You still have to take things with you to get the water. You still have to take it back. I mean, there's a lot of work in getting out to living water. But sometimes we say, God, I got this, right? And that can be dangerous and can eat away at us and can be really unhealthy. And the other picture, though, is that if you partake of the living water, according to Jesus and John, then you, in some way, become that living water to somebody else. And I just want you guys to think maybe this week, what are some of the things that you guys are doing that is cistern digging? Right? That is you just working to make something that is just going to create stagnant water. And stagnant water can be whatever metaphor you want it to be. Anxiety, stress, unhealthy relationships, whatever it might be. And then what happens when we take time and sit next to the river and we become living water in this mystical, amazing, metaphorical way? What are ways in our life that we are actually refreshing streams of life to others? And so I just want, and I don't know if anyone, I'll leave it open for a moment, if anyone wants to actually share, like if they can think of something in their life that is cistern-esque, or something in their life that is someone else maybe being living water to you, or opportunities that you've been living water to someone else. I can tell you guys the group me thing that we started with the blessings. And if you're not on that, I really would encourage you to talk to me about being on that list on the group me app. To just get a notification through the day and it's just someone blessing God for something is living water to me. Like that is so good for me to read when someone just posts for friends or for 15-minute tasks going right or whatever. For vegetables, I think at one point you bless that, right? Like it might seem small or trivial, but that's been living water for me. That has been so good. I hope every time I get a notification on my phone, it's someone writing a blessing, not me getting an email or a text or anything like that. So for me, that's been one of the ways that I've experienced living water from others. Does anybody have anything they want to share, whether it's living water or a cistern? Even online? Kelly? Anyone else today? Okay, so next week, we start going through Genesis, is that correct, Tom? I have the schedule correct? So we're gonna start our Torah cycle starting next week, and we're gonna go through Torah again over this next year through Bible studies. Sundays will not typically be walking through, but for the next several weeks, we'll be talking about the book of Genesis.
Kelly
And-
says yay.
Nice, I do too. I'm excited to get back to going through Torah. So our Monday night Bible study will be Torah centric. We'll be working through Torah, and Sundays will be sometimes, other times it will be something specific that we're talking about as maybe. But so I encourage you guys to come out and participate in Bible study and Genesis. I think that the Genesis section is a great section to bring somebody to church to hear about. Because like we did some of the imagery today about Sukkot, there is so much imagery in the book of Genesis that I would be willing to bet all of you, unless you were here 2 years ago and we went through it, have not heard Genesis through some of this imagery. And I think it's beautiful and rich and good. So just keep that in mind. All right. Kelly, do you have any prayer requests or anything? If we can stop broadcasting to do